morning was quiet until Catherine Graves, the HOA president, sprayed my service dog Max in the face. One bark was all it took. Max was startled, not aggressive, but Catherine saw a dangerous animal and decided to take matters into her own hands. Before I could react, she aimed a canister and hit him with a chemical that made his eyes swell. I dropped to my knees to check on him, but that's when the cops arrived. At first, I thought they'd help, but then Catherine did something that changed everything. What happened next, she really underestimated me. My name's Ethan Harris. I never imagined I'd be the guy who ended up in these kinds of situations. I'd served my time in the military training dogs to detect explosives in the most dangerous places, and now I just wanted peace. That's why I moved to Brookside Acres, a quiet suburban neighborhood where white picket fences lined the streets and the lawns were kept so neat they could impress any sergeant. It was supposed to be the calm after the storm, the place where my dog Max and I could finally relax. Max isn't a bomb-sniffing K9. He's a golden retriever trained to help manage the noise in my head to keep me grounded. His most dangerous mission, chasing squirrels away from the bird feeder. He's my service dog, and no one understands him better than I do. He's not just a dog, he's family. Every morning we went on our walk around the block, a ritual that gave me a sense of normalcy. But peace in a place like this doesn't come without its rules. And those rules had a name: Catherine Graves. Catherine was the president of our homeowners association, the self-appointed queen of this little suburban kingdom. Her eyes were always sharp, looking for someone to step out of line. If your lawn was half an inch too high or your mailbox wasn't the exact shade of beige, Catherine would be there, clipboard in hand, ready to write you up. She was everywhere. The enforcer of community standards. The final word on what was allowed and what wasn't. And she wasn't shy about it. I could feel her eyes on me the first time I noticed her, staring from her perfect little house as I walked past. I didn't think much of it at first, just another neighbor. But Max knew. He could feel it too. The subtle tension in the air every time we crossed her path. He'd give her a side glance, his ears just slightly back, sensing something off about her. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was a normal walk or so, I thought. The sprinklers were doing their usual dance, the sun still low, and Max was happily sniffing at Mrs. Parker's rose garden. It was peaceful, calming, the kind of quiet I'd worked so hard for. But all it took was a single sharp crack of a backfiring truck down the street, and suddenly everything went sideways. Max barked. Just once. A quick, sharp sound, more out of instinct than aggression. I'd been through far worse noise in my life, but it rattled Max. He pressed into my side, grounding me like he always did. A simple bark, nothing more, but it was enough. Catherine's door flew open, and there she was marching toward me like a general. She had this angry, pinched look on her face, her eyes squinting behind her visor. "Ethan Harris," she called, her voice cutting through the air. "You cannot control that animal." I stayed calm. "It's okay, Max," I whispered under my breath. But Catherine wasn't interested in calm. "Your dog is a menace," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "He's constantly barking, threatening the peace of this neighborhood." It wasn't true. Max barked maybe once or twice a week, and even then it was more of a polite announcement. But Catherine had already made up her mind. I felt my jaw tighten, the blood rushing to my face, but I didn't raise my voice. "He's a service dog, Catherine." He was startled. "He's not a threat." But Catherine wasn't listening. She had an audience now. A few neighbors peeked out from behind their windows, watching the spectacle unfold. This was her moment, I realized. I tried to move on, tugging gently on Max's leash, hoping to get away from her before things escalated. But Catherine wasn't done. "This is your final warning, Mr. Harris," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she reserved for confrontation. "This community has standards. And you," she said, glaring at me, "have a dangerous dog." I turned to walk away, hoping it was over. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew it wasn't. The tension in the air was thick as I tried to pull Max away, but Catherine Graves wasn't about to let me walk away that easily. "This is your last warning, Mr. Harris," she shouted, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You're ruining the peace of this neighborhood." The words hit like a slap in the face, but I kept my cool. I knew Max hadn't done anything wrong. He was just startled, doing his job, protecting me the only way he knew how. I kept walking, a tight knot forming in my chest. I didn't want trouble, but I sure as hell wasn't about to let Catherine get away with her lies. We reached the corner of the block when I saw the police car rolling down the street. Officer Taylor and Officer Scott, regulars who knew everyone in the neighborhood, pulled up to the curb, the sound of their brakes slicing through the air. Officers Catherine practically ran toward them, her face lit up with fake relief. "Thank goodness you're here. This man's vicious animal just lunged at me. He's a menace." My stomach dropped. Vicious Max was sitting at my side, calm as could be. But Catherine had already spun her web, and she wasn't about to let go. I stood still, trying to keep my anger in check. That's not true, I said, my voice steady but hard. We're leaving. Officer Taylor looked at us, his eyes already rolling, but he kept his composure. What's going on here? Catherine launched into her usual dramatic routine, painting Max as a snarling beast ready to rip her to shreds. Her voice was full of fake panic, but I could see it for what it was, manipulation. She was playing a game, and I wasn't going to let her win. He's a menace, Catherine repeated, throwing her hands in the air. He needs to be muzzled, put on the dangerous dog registry. I let out a quiet, controlled breath. Catherine, you're lying. This is absurd. Officer Scott glanced at Officer Taylor, who sighed, clearly tired of Catherine's theatrics. Ma'am, Officer Taylor said, trying to calm the situation. It's just a dog on a leash. He seems fine now. Now she was twisting it all into something it wasn't. But before I could respond, Catherine did the unthinkable. In one swift motion, Catherine reached into her purse, pulled out a small canister, and sprayed Max right in the face. Max yelped a sound so full of pain and confusion that it shattered my resolve. His body jerked back his paws frantically, trying to rub his face, his eyes watering as the chemical burned. My heart raced in my chest as I dropped to my knees, panic taking over for a second. Max, I cried, my hands moving over his face, checking for injuries. His eyes were red and swollen, his fur matted with the spray. The sharp chemical scent hit me something akin to ammonia mixed with cheap perfume. It wasn't citronella. It was something far worse. And in that moment I snapped. The world around me blurred. All I could see was Catherine's smug face standing there with her hand still on the canister. She had just hurt my dog. She had just assaulted Max, and the fact that she thought she could get away with it made my blood run cold. What did you just do? I asked, my voice low, dangerously quiet. I wasn't angry, not yet. But the cold fury building inside me made me feel like I could do anything to make her pay. Catherine straightened, raising an eyebrow. I'm defending myself, she said, holding up the canister. It's just citronella spray. Completely harmless. Harmless Max was still shaking, pawing at his face, his confusion turning into distress. He didn't know what had just happened. He didn't understand why the person he trusted had hurt him. Officer Scott took a cautious step forward, but Officer Taylor stood still, his expression unreadable. He looked at the canister in Catherine's hand, then at Max, still whimpering. This isn't citronella, I said, my voice steady but full of venom. You've just assaulted my service dog. Officer Scott's eyes widened, and he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small bottle of saline to rinse Max's eyes. Calm down, sir, Officer Scott said, trying to defuse the situation. Let's get his eyes cleaned out. But I wasn't calming down. She sprayed him in front of you, I said, my voice rising. You saw it happen, and now she's lying about it. I didn't care anymore. My hands were shaking, my fists clenched as I looked between the officers and Catherine. You can't just let her get away with this. Officer Taylor stepped forward, his face hardening. Ma'am, give me that canister. He held out his hand. Catherine hesitated for a moment, but then reluctantly, she handed it over. Officer Taylor sealed it in an evidence bag, and I felt a small sense of satisfaction. Finally, someone was seeing the truth. But it wasn't enough yet. I'm filing a report, I said, pulling out my phone. I snapped a picture of Max's swollen eyes, of Catherine standing smugly with the canister, and of the officers trying to remain neutral. I'm documenting this. You don't get to hurt my dog and walk away. Catherine's face twisted in annoyance as Officer Taylor slid the canister into the evidence bag, but it was too late. The truth was out. Max had been assaulted, and the law wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. The HOA meeting was packed. I walked into the community clubhouse with my heart pounding, but I kept my composure. This wasn't just another HOA confrontation, it was the moment I'd been waiting for. I'd collected evidence, built my case, and now it was time to expose Catherine Graves for the liar she was. Catherine stood at the front of the room in her element as the HOA president eyes scanning the crowd. She looked confident, smug, even as she readied herself to take me down. I couldn't help but feel the fire rise inside me. This was the moment. She began to speak, painting me as the villain in a story she'd created. Jonathan Harris's dog is a menace to the community, Catherine claimed. He's dangerous and aggressive, and we've received multiple complaints about him. I stood still, my hands clenched, but I stayed calm. I knew the truth, and soon so would everyone else. Excuse me, Miss Graves, I said, cutting her off mid-sentence. Before we discuss these accusations, I'd like to ask a few questions. Catherine froze for a second, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't expecting me to speak up. What's your point, Mr. Harris? She sneered. About this alleged dog bite. Where's the child? Where's the proof? I asked, my voice steady, but the room was silent with anticipation. I've asked for the name, the parents, the hospital report. There's nothing. Catherine's face tightened. The family wishes to remain anonymous, she snapped. They're scared of retaliation. I smirked. scared. The only thing anyone should be scared of is your lies. You're the one who's been terrorizing this neighborhood." The room was still everyone holding their breath. I could see some people beginning to question her story, their glances shifting between each other. Then I made my move. "And if we're talking about proof, I'd like to introduce someone." That's when Sarah stood up. Sarah, Catherine's assistant, was visibly nervous, her hands shaking as she held up a folder. I could see the panic in Catherine's eyes as she looked at Sarah. She wasn't ready for this. Sarah's voice was shaky, but clear. "I'm here to tell the truth," she said, her gaze locked on Catherine. "There was no child. There was no bite. I was there. Jonathan's dog was on a leash, calm as could be." Catherine sprayed the dog in the face for no reason. The room erupted in murmurs. I saw Catherine's face go pale, her smug expression turning to one of fear. "Sarah," she stammered, her voice faltering. "What are you doing?" Sarah looked around the room, her voice gaining strength. "I didn't know what to do at first. Catherine threatened my job if I didn't sign the report, but I can't lie anymore. It wasn't true." Catherine stepped forward, her eyes wide with fury. "She's lying. She's just a disgruntled employee." But Sarah wasn't backing down. "I have the truth on my side," Sarah said, holding up a sworn affidavit, the papers shaking in her hand. "And I've already sent a copy to Animal Control and the district attorney." The room was buzzing now with people exchanging glances, and Catherine was visibly crumbling. Her face twisted with panic as she realized her grip on everything was slipping. I turned to Marcus, sitting at the back of the room, phone in hand. "And just to make sure everyone's aware," he said loudly, "this entire meeting is being live-streamed. We've got over 500 viewers right now, including reporters from Channel 4 News. So Catherine, if you'd like to repeat your accusations, feel free." Catherine froze her eyes, locking onto Marcus's phone. It was over. The truth had won. The aftermath was swift, almost immediate. The moment the meeting ended, my phone buzzed with notifications, texts, emails, and calls. The video had gone viral. By the time I made it home, the neighborhood was already abuzz. People weren't looking at me with fear or judgment anymore. They were looking at me with support. The news vans had arrived, and Max, for the first time in days, looked at me like everything was going to be okay. The quarantine sign still hung on my door, but now it felt like a distant memory. Catherine's reign was over. The whole neighborhood had watched her fall. The following morning, a new, unfamiliar voice greeted me on the phone. It was the supervisor from Animal Control. "Mr. Harris," she began, "we've received a sworn affidavit from Sarah Peters recanting her original statement. In light of this new evidence and the live stream footage, we're dropping all proceedings." The weight lifted from my chest. I leaned against the doorframe, watching Max wag his tail, oblivious to the world around him. "The quarantine is lifted effective immediately," the supervisor continued. "We apologize for the distress this caused." I stood there, my knees weak as the relief washed over me. The battle wasn't just for Max, it was for everything I believed in: truth, justice, and the simple right to live in peace. It didn't end there, though. The fallout from the meeting came down hard on Catherine. By the next day, the HOA was in disarray. The board members who'd blindly followed her were out, and the entire management company was scrambling to save face. They issued a public apology, but it was clear they were just trying to save themselves from the legal fallout. I wasn't done with Catherine yet. The court case came quickly, and the truth was undeniable. The emails, the witness statements, the live stream video, it all pointed to one thing: Catherine had orchestrated a campaign of lies and manipulation, using her position to bully and control the entire neighborhood. In court, Catherine's lawyer tried to paint me as an unstable veteran and Sarah as a disgruntled employee. It was a weak defense, and my lawyer tore it apart with ease. The judge, a no-nonsense woman, didn't waste time. "In my 15 years on this bench," she said, "I've rarely seen such a textbook case of malicious prosecution and neighborhood terrorism." She turned to Catherine. "You used your position not to build a community, but to tear it down with fear and intimidation." The judge's words were a hammer, and Catherine's facade crumbled. "Mr. Harris," she said, turning to me, "what you and your service animal endured is unconscionable. This court finds in your favor on all counts." The judgment was a blow that Catherine never saw coming. The fines were voided. The HOA's actions were deemed illegal. But the best part, the judge referred the case to the district attorney with a recommendation for criminal charges. Catherine's world came crashing down. A few weeks later, she sold her house at a loss and disappeared, leaving behind the wreckage of her lies. As for the HOA, it was dissolved. The new board, elected by the residents, was determined to rebuild the community on a foundation of fairness and transparency. But the most important victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the small moments, the smiles from my neighbors, the encouraging words of those who'd once stayed silent. It was in the way Max's tail wagged a little faster every time we took a walk. It was in the new sense of peace I'd earned. The day the new HOA held its first meeting, they made an official apology to me and issued a sizable donation to a local veterans service dog organization in Max's name. The old HOA was gone, and with it the fear and control that had once poisoned this place. Max had become a symbol of resistance, of standing up for what's right, and of the power of truth. The final act of the new HOA was a celebration in Max's honor. They named the small park at the end of the block Max's Park and invited the whole neighborhood for a ceremony. Max trotted happily beside me, his shiny new medal hanging from his collar, his tail wagging with pride. The mayor stood before the crowd, presenting Max with the city's Civilian Service Medal, a recognition of his role in uniting the community and fighting back against injustice. "This is for loyalty, courage, and the kind of quiet strength that makes a neighborhood strong," the mayor said as the crowd cheered. As the ceremony ended, Marty, our tech wizard, gave a salute and joked into his walkie-talkie, "Mission complete," requesting belly rubs. I laughed, looking down at Max, who didn't care about medals or applause. He just knew people were being kind, and that was enough for him. As the last of the news cameras left, I took Max for a walk through Max's park. The sky was soft with the golden light of dusk. We circled the familiar path, and as we reached the bench, I sat down Max by my side, his head resting on my lap. And as I looked around the neighborhood at the houses, the trees, the people walking, their dogs smiling and talking, I knew one thing for certain: I had fought for my home, and we had won.